Okay, so you don't have to answer any questions that you don't have to if you can't really remember them.
Okay.
Would you say your family? Would you say you were from a diversity culture from your family?
Not really. Um, no, my exposure to diversity was really based on my school experience and growing up as I got a little bit older in high school.
Would you say your family was poor, wealthy, or
Very poor. I grew up a child of a single mother in a time where there really weren't very few. I didn't even know another child who came from a divorced family. And so we lived below the poverty line in an area of Dallas which had the highest number of millionaires in the country. So it was a very strange. Everyone I was around was extremely wealthy, and I was extremely poor.
would you say your mother's job was to provide for you?
hmm She was the only. My father was not on the scene. It was strictly up to my mother, and her parents helped quite a bit. My grandparents.
What is your highest level of education?
I have a doctorate, bachelor's degree.
Did you know any homosexuals when growing up? Did you know any?
Not so much in elementary school, but when I went to later on when I went to college, I did. And this was also the heyday of the, LGBT, gay civil
Mm.
rights movement. So it was really different initially. Things kind of changed after AIDS became a reality, but yeah, I knew gay people in college.
Did you go to public school?
I did, but it was a very unique public school because, as I mentioned earlier, it was in this very wealthy area. In terms of the resources available to the students, it was much more like a private school, although it was a public school.
Do you remember disaster drills?
Yes, and it was more about fire drills at the time. But then when I was 16, I moved to California and I lived with an uncle, and then we had bomb drills, and actually students with makeup to simulate an actual someone had been injured. So that we had that started. And the drills, I'm not even sure if they were fire drills or the getting under the desk. I think that was more a legacy of the Cold War, probably trying to avoid a bomb or some. I think it was really from the Cold War era thinking.
When they were doing the practice with students, would you say that did you know who the student were?
I didn't. I was relatively new to that
Okay.
school district. That was in California, but I was really. It was very upsetting because we didn't know if it was real or not.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So I don't think they did handle that very well at the school.
During your school time, were the girls ever segregated?
What do you mean?
The girls were like desegregated from sports, certain classes.
Oh yeah, I mean this was the era of girls take home ec, boys take wood shop,
Comed.
which they don't even call it that anymore. It was home economics, which
Oh.
was basically cooking and sewing and
Oh wow.
home decorating, and then boys took wood shop and so working with tools. So it was very much gender based. Same thing with sports too.
So there weren't many girl sports.
No, this was in the pre-Title IX days.
Oh, okay. Do you remember any certain major events during the civil rights movement?
Well, for me, yes, because um, I lived in Dallas, and I remember when this wasn't specifically linked to the civil rights, but I was in Dallas when President Kennedy was killed, and a lot of my classmates had gone to the parade, and he had been an advocate for civil rights. And then also when I was at the end of high school, I went and lived in Marianna, Arkansas for a while, and it was their first year of integration. This was in the 70s, and integration had not taken place in this small town, and so it had a really big impact on me because I saw how the black students were treated. There was but it was interesting to me because the black students were very friendly and warm to me, but they were, the white students, even though there was this whole history of racism in that community, you would think that there would be an openness, but there wasn't. Most of the white parents were very angry. They pulled their kids out and they started a private school, white-only school. And it was really sad to me because, and then I had a unique situation because my uncle who I lived with was the only eye doctor in town, and so everybody went to see him. And every black student, whether I knew them or not, would go in and say, "Mary's my friend," to my uncle. And my uncle was getting madder and madder because me being friends, I had one black friend, but it was such an anomaly for that community that everybody talked about it and said they were my friend, which I didn't have a problem with, but my uncle did because he was a deacon in a local church. And of course, as part of his Christian ideology, you're not supposed to be a bigot racist, but actually he was, very much so. And so every time some black kid would say they were my friend, he would just get angrier and angrier. And so I started doing, this was really, I guess, a radical thing to do, but I decided I wanted to learn more about civil rights movements, and I started bringing things like some of the black seminal books from the Black Power Rights movement. I started bringing things like Soul on Ice and Malcolm X's biography, things like that to school. And keep in mind, this was the first year of integration in a very racist community. So that was my introduction, in a way, to the civil rights movement.
Cool. Would you say that your uncle's influence like made you look the other way, or?
What do you mean?
So were you affected by your uncle's influence?
No, I was really pretty much set. I made a decision. I wanted to learn about these movements and what was going on myself. And if anything, I looked at the religious bigotry because all religions claim to treat people equally and not be biased, right? But I saw he was an outright racist.
Do you have any strong memories of the Vietnam War?
You know, I was very young during that time, but I was a teenager towards the end of it. I was of the generation of a draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I came of age during the era of the Pentagon Papers, of people were going to Canada to avoid the draft. It was a very unpopular war. I remember hearing about the Weather Underground and groups that were engaged in activities against the war. But pretty much everybody was opposed to the war. I mean, most of the young people were opposed to the war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because it was a secret war and it was illegal according to the Geneva Convention, nobody knew anything about the Hmong contribution to the war. It was there was complete silence around that.
Yeah. Did you believe that the Vietnam War was needed?
No, I disagreed with it, and I think history proves that point.
Oh, okay. So you would say that even now your views are still, that was a bad war and...
I do think so. Look at all the people that died for what?
Yeah.
Vietnam fell to the north, but so many people died. So many Vietnamese, Hmong, U.S. soldiers, and then a lot of people that didn't. I knew quite a few people whose lives were irreparably messed up from serving in the war. A lot of veterans came back, addicted to drugs, leaving kids behind.
Some of them were hated.
Pardon?
Some of them were hated.
I don't know. I think I think people generally understood that this was a draft, that most people didn't volunteer. So I don't think that there was a hatred towards veterans. I don't think it was direct. I was young, but that was my impression. It wasn't towards individuals. It was towards the policies.
Going back to President John F. Kennedy's assassin, how was your family affected?
Well, my mother wasn't that involved. I mean, I really remember I spent a lot of time with my grandparents in Arkansas every time there was a holiday. And I remember the hour after hour of the funeral being televised on TV. I mean, the whole country was in mourning. And being from Dallas, it really had more of an impact because people, you'd say you were from Dallas, and that's what people would immediately think of. They'd think of his assassination. It wasn't until the TV show Dallas came out that people had a different image for Dallas. So then they associated it with a soap opera, you know, this very popular TV show.
So during 1969, I believe the first man on the moon. Do you remember watching it?
Not really.
Oh, really?
Honestly, I remember John Glenn more circling, but I mean, it didn't have a huge impact on me.
Oh, yeah. So like you were like, oh, that's
Not
a
paying much attention.
Okay. But then, what are your feelings now about it?
Well, so much changed with the NASA research, and I hope that it continues. You know, there's been cycles of where it was funded and where it was not, but so much of NASA research has led to great social benefits and medicines, different products. So I hope that there is funding in the future and that exploration is supported more than it has been during certain administrations.
During the Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter election, what were your thoughts about it?
Well, I actually went to meet Carter. I was in Dallas, and he came to Southern Methodist University, and I swear it was like a Confederate rally. There were Confederate flags everywhere. It was a really bizarre thing. I was opposed to Reagan because I did not support his position on the Vietnam War. Anyway.
So what candidate would you say you were towards more?
Carter.
Okay.
And Carter, you know, he was not very successful as a president, but he's done enormous positive work as a retired president.
What?
Iranian hostage crisis. He had a failed attempt to release the hostages in Iran.
Oh, wow. Thank you for the interview.
Oh, you're
Sort of.
welcome.
Yeah.
I'm sorry my voice is a little off.
Oh, that's fine.
I hope you had enough.